So would you pop over with me to the Gospel of Matthew chapter 5, our gospel reading this morning. We're going to be continuing our brief series, Out of Order, looking at 4 attitudes that control us and how God's grace can restore them to order. Now, last week we looked at the subject of guilt, and we kind of started our consideration with the classic Edgar Allan Poe story, The Telltale Heart. Well, as it so happens, there's another story that Poe wrote that kind of gives us some insight into this passage of Scripture here, the Cask of Amontillado. And so in the story, there's 2 noblemen, Montresor and Fortunato, and in this story, it's in the middle of carnival season, basically Mardi Gras season, and Montresor comes upon a very inebriated Fortunato. And now between these two, there was a surly history. Fortunato had committed several serious insults against Montresor, and so he despised that man's very existence and had sworn to do all he could to take revenge. And so in his inebriated state, Fortunato handed him a golden opportunity to enact this plan. And so he asked this man's help for assistance in identifying a rare vintage, a cask of Amontillado. And so he takes him down to the cellar, which also served as the family catacombs, and since he was drunk, he didn't see this suspicious at all. And when they're finally far enough down, Montresor strikes and chains his adversary to the wall, and then with trowel in hand begins to wall him in to the crypt. And as he lays the last brick, the screams of Fortunato are muffled, and as he walks away, satisfied with his revenge. And as the story ends, that we're told by the narrator that 50 years had passed and nobody had ever found out what happened to the other nobleman. Now, in literature, there are only a few types of story structures that have endured throughout time, and one of those, which this story falls into, is a revenge story. Now, from the Count of Monte Cristo to, First Blood, revenge stories have endured with great staying power. And that makes sense because they're all built on a very common human experience, the feeling of being wronged and angry enough to do something about it. So as Christians, we know that the idea of revenge is not a biblical response to anger. So we have to ask the question, what is and how do we deal with anger biblically? How do we avoid letting anger fester into our heart where we commit horrific crimes such as the ones in our story? Well, here in Matthew's gospel, I think we can find an answer, as Jesus himself took on the subject of anger and how we deal with it in our lives. And he gives us a picture here and tells us the first thing we need to know. And the first thing is, anger is destructive. Pick up in verse 21. You have heard that it was said to our ancestors, do not murder. And whoever murders will be subject to judgment. But I tell you, everyone who is angry with his brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Whoever insults his brother or sister will be subject to the court. Whoever says, you fool, will be subject to hellfire. So our passage this morning, we're popping right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, which is 3 chapters in Matthew's Gospel that give us a distilled picture of Jesus' main teachings. Jesus probably took these teachings from place to place and presented them often as he traveled around throughout his ministry. That's why if you find in Luke's Gospel, it's a very similar account, but it's in a different place at a different time, and some of the phrasing is very different. But Matthew decided to put it all in one place to give us a full picture of how we can see Jesus' teachings. And so Jesus began this section by correcting a misunderstanding that remains to our day in certain pockets of Christianity, that he did not come to do away with the law and the prophets, the Old Testament, but he came to bring them to their fullness. All of the teachings of the Torah and the promises of the prophets are wrapped up in the person and ministry of Jesus. So all of the instruction and wisdom of Moses and Solomon and David and all the rest, and the encouragement and hope of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Amos and so on were all wrapped up in the person of Jesus and in his teachings. So to demonstrate his point, he then goes to extrapolate on 6 different Old Testament scriptures. And he's doing what a rabbi would do in that day. He takes the text and he explains it to them so they could see how the message he was bringing was in fact not the doing away of the old, but it's the message that they had been listening for all along. And so today we're going to focus our attention on the first of those teachings and how to deal with anger. Now, anger is probably one of the most common emotions in our human experience. We feel it as early as infancy. You tell a kid no when they want to do something, guess what happens? They get angry. You tell an adult no when they want to do something. Sometimes they act worse than the toddler. This is a common experience, but the roots of anger are multifaceted. They come from many different places. And we're going to look at just 3 of those this morning. The first place anger can come from is offense. Now, it may be that someone has deeply hurt you in some way, like Montresor in Poe's story. There's been some indignity done to you that brought out anger. Someone has treated you poorly, or they didn't treat you as well as you believe they should have. That is one place anger can come from. We see that how often in our day. There's reaction videos about that all over the internet if you spend any time on social media. Another place that it can come from is fear. It could be that your anger comes from being afraid of something. And actually, that's probably the most common one that I see these days. So the other day, I was at the gym, and I was on the treadmill, and I had the great misfortune of my AirPods dying right in the middle of it. So that means I was forced to not listen to the music I like or the podcasts I like. I had to listen to what they were playing, and that was awful. And then so I turned my eyes to the TVs. And now, if you go at the right time of day, you might not have this problem, because if we go at the right time of day, there might be basketball on or something like that that's actually decent to watch. But at 5:30 in the morning, the only things that are on is news and infomercials. And all of these TVs lined up there, all stacked up against each other, in particular the news stations. And there was every major news network, you could name them all. But since I was bored and I needed to get my heart rate up for cardio anyway, I decided to go ahead and watch it. I'm convinced that's why it's up there. It's up there to get your heart rate going. It really helps. And so all these TVs, all these different news stations are all on different subjects, and they all have different opinions and different outlooks on politics and ethics and all that stuff. But you know, they all had one thing in common. All of them were very angry and upset. Now, some of them were upset about something that happened, and some of them were upset about something that hadn't happened, but it just might. Anger like that, anger we see in this outrage machine of media, comes from fear. And it's designed to provoke fear in those watching. Fear of the unknown, fear of the different, fear of change, fear of things staying the same. What we see on the face of that is anger and outrage, but under the surface, it's all fear. And if they're lucky enough, it's enough to keep you there, to exploit your fears, to exploit your concerns, so that you'll stay watching through all of the commercials. I have a theory that all these news networks are underwritten by the people who make blood pressure medication. That's my personal theory. That is my conspiracy theory that I truly believe. But anyway, but all of this outrage is to exploit our fear and drive us to anger, because nothing keeps people focused in and sold on your idea more than anger. A third thing that can cause anger is injustice. Have you ever truly been wronged, really hurt, stolen from, exploited, attacked, deeply hurt. If you haven't, I bet you could know someone who has been. Someone who has been assaulted or robbed or harmed by a reckless driver. And after all of the suffering, the expense, and the trouble of getting their life back together, nothing is ever done about it. There's no restitution. There is no justice. Daily we hear of murderers walking free, of rapists who are not brought to account, of warlords who use desperate young men as cannon fodder and keep raking in the money from their endless conflicts. We hear of the poor who are being stepped on and pushed down for more power and influence for the wealthy and the elite. What that can create in us is anger. Anger that something has not been done about it. Anger that wrong continues to happen. Anger that the suffering of others has not been repaid, has not been remedied. Injustice can be a cause of anger. Now, there are many other causes of anger, but in short, we can summarize anger as not the response to not getting something we want or need. And it can be not getting the respect we believe we deserve, or the security that we need, or the justice that we need. Anger is a natural response to any of these. And in reality, anger in some of these situations is not wrong in and of itself. You should be angry about injustice, because that's not the way God made the world to work. We should be angry about fear, because fear comes from lack of security, from lack of trust. But when anger festers, it becomes dangerous. And if we do not deal with our anger biblically, it will deal with us destructively. So Jesus says this about anger. He says, you heard it said, don't murder. Now that's pretty fair. Pretty fair. He goes on, but I tell you, everyone who is angry with his brother or sister is subject to judgment. Now wait a minute, Jesus. You should have saw what they did. I mean, can you believe they used the wrong door? That's a private joke. He's not finished either. He says, whoever insults his brother or sister will be subject to the court. You better hope God doesn't listen to us in traffic. I'm not going to say anything about that. Whoever says, you fool, will be subject to hellfire. Now, what does he mean by all this? Isn't this a little extreme? Isn't this a little crazy? The short version of this, what was written, what you heard, what was given to our ancestors, wasn't just to stop you from murdering each other, though that's a nice side effect. That was written to call attention to hearts that resort to murder. In Poe's story, Fortunato did not commit a killing offense, whatever he did. But in Montresor's heart, that anger came out as murder. Just like our anger will come out as insults. Our anger will come out as belittling. You know that phrase where it says, you fool, it's basically you're empty-headed, you're worthless, you're nothing. That's what that really means. Our anger comes out by depersonalizing a person, by seeing them as less than an image of God, an object to be disposed of. Jesus is saying you need to be rid of your anger before it festers into murder. Don't let your anger be your destruction, consuming you like fire. If we let it, anger will always tear us apart. That's true as a person, as a family, as a community, and the world. Look at what anger has done to our country. Anger divides and it eventually conquers. And if we do not deal with it, it will destroy us. So how do we deal with this anger before it destroys us? Well, if anger is destructive, then our second thing we notice is anger must be diffused. Now, it's like a bomb waiting to go off. Defusing is the only way to take the power out of anger. And how do we do this? Well, verse 23. So if you are offering your gift on the altar and there you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled with your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. So Jesus here, we don't really see this here, but he's painting a very extreme picture to demonstrate how important it is to get rid of this anger. He's delivering this sermon by the Sea of Galilee. So all those people there are from that area. And they're gathered here and they're listening, and these are good Jewish people who make their journey every year to the temple to bring their offering. And in this example, he's saying, now look at it this way. It's as if you have made your journey all the way to Jerusalem, to the temple, a journey of great expense. And you're there, you're in line with thousands of others, but then you remember that there's something between you and your brother, another person, your brother, your sister. And so you got to step out of line, leave your gifts sitting there, which that goat's probably not going to be there by the time they get back. And then they got to journey all the way back to Galilee to make it right before they go back to make that offering. This is an absurd picture. It's comically absurd. It's very much hyperbole. And it's that absurd because it's that serious. Jesus puts a high value on dealing with our anger. In his context, he's talking about a lot more than just being a little miffed at somebody who cut you off in traffic. Not that that would ever happen in Mobile. At that time, he is talking to people who are occupied by a violent empire, people who are taxed into poverty and exploited by their fellow countrymen. They're swindled by the rich and elite in Jerusalem. These people have every reason to be angry. But they must learn to put away that anger at any cost. He uses another example of two men going to court. And if they don't find a way to reconcile, it's going to cost them everything. Anger must be diffused because, like a bomb, it only has one result: destruction. So seek reconciliation and forgiveness at any cost before your anger costs you everything. And again, like last week, the solution to our anger is simple, but not easy, because forgiveness takes a lot. What does it take? Well, first, it takes humility. Just as a possible cause of anger is offense, to defuse that anger takes humility. It means taking the low road. It means letting yourself be seen as less than you think you are. Somebody once said that humility is simply seeing yourself as you truly are, instead of who you want to be. And that humility goes either way. Either you must humble yourself to approach the person you are angry with, or you must listen to the person you angered. No matter which side of the table you're on in that position, you must be humble and listen. You must see them not as an offending party or an offended party, but as an equal before God. Think back to Jesus' example. That person in line had to step out in front of all those people, leave that animal behind, and travel a week back to make things right with the other person. That takes humility. Now, what if you were here standing in line to receive communion, and you were to remember that you had to make something right? So you step out and walk over to them, and right there, right in front of God and everybody, you said, "I'm sorry, but I know I upset you with what happened the other day. Will you forgive me?" Or you step up to them and you say, "I'm sorry, but I've been really angry about what you posted or what you said or what you did the other day, and I've been holding on to that. Will you forgive me?" That takes humility. And God blesses that. Because you know the promise we have? God gives grace to the humble. He honors the humble because the humble are imitating Him and walking in His way, in His kingdom. God set the bar for humility by coming down among us, taking upon Himself the form of a servant, and even to death on a cross. The most shameful way to die at that time. Is an "I'm sorry" really too much to ask in light of that? Second, this kind of forgiveness and reconciliation takes courage. Because just as fear can cause anger, defusing it takes courage. You have to have the guts to deal with your stuff. To deal with the fact that we don't know the future, nor do we know the minds of others. And we do have to have the courage to trust and acknowledge that. Can you imagine how much better we would all get along if we just gave each other the benefit of the doubt? Do you know we probably wouldn't be angered so easily if we didn't interpret everything as a personal affront? We learned this as kids. I think of my niece and nephew. How many times when I'm around them do I hear, "He did it on purpose"? Then I think, I'm a pastor. How many times do I hear, "He did it on purpose"? And in reality, half the time it's an accident just because they aren't paying attention. But what if we learn to have that attitude and try not to meet people where they are? You know, it takes courage to say, "You know, this bothered me. What did you mean by that?" Or, "You know, this upset me, but I don't want anything to come between us, so let's work this out." That takes guts. Think of Jesus' second example. The two are on their way to court, and one had the courage to look the other person in the eye and settle it right there. He didn't hide behind a judge, didn't hide behind a system. He had the courage. But what if they don't accept it? What if they turn us away? What if they hurt us again? What if they do something worse? Those are the kinds of questions that fear asks. The real question we need to ask is, what will it cost me if I don't make this right? That takes guts. And whether you're the one who started or you're the one it was done to, facing up to it honestly and transparently means having courage to walk in a different way, to not let the way this world works be the way you walk. To be brave enough to confront anger is part of what it means to bring God's reconciling kingdom to this world. You could keep doing it like everybody else does it and duke it out on social media, smear campaigns and gossip, or you can have the courage to walk a different path, to swim upstream, to walk the way that God laid out for us. That takes real courage. Third, and most importantly, it means we must be willing to bear the wrong. Just as we talked about last week with guilt, when anger comes from injustice, there's no way to pay that back. For an injustice to happen, a wrong has been committed, and you can't pay back a wrong with a right. And this is probably the stickiest of all three of these steps for us, because there are a lot of people angry about injustice. We get angry when we find out we've been lied to by the people we're supposed to be able to trust. We grow angry when we see the innocent suffer. We get angry when we see those who have done horrible things skate off with barely a slap on the wrist, with no restoration, no justice. Anger in those situations is not necessarily wrong. Because did you know God's angry about all that? Did you know God hates injustice? God hates lies? God hates unequal measures? That means he hates bias and preferential treatment and inequitable consequences. Anger in those cases is not wrong, but your response to it will be right or wrong. If we cannot pay back an injustice, then what do we do with it? Do we stay angry? Do we swear revenge? Do we take it into our own hand? Do we riot and destroy? Do we use harmful, vitriolic language? Do we deride the opposition who think differently than we do? Well, let's ask this question. What does God do? Here's what he did. He humbled himself, came down among us, faced our fear, and bore our wrong. Reconciliation, when you have been wronged or have wronged someone else, means that someone will bear the weight of what was done. You can't turn back the clock. What's done is done. And when you forgive someone, you have to take the wrong of what they did on yourself, and you will bear it. You can't take it away. They can't take it away. But by bearing it, you don't need to be crushed by it. We can choose to do what God does and put it away. You know how far he put it? He put it as far as the east is from the west. He chooses not to remember it anymore. Does he forget? No. But does he remember it? Also, no. How does that work? Got me. He bears our sin and takes it on himself. Why? Because you are worth more than what you have done. So if we're supposed to love one another as he's loved us, if we're supposed to love our enemies as he's loved us, we're supposed to love our neighbors as ourselves, what does that mean we have to do to the things that have been done to us? I'll just remind you that Christians don't get a choice. You're told to love each other, love your neighbor, love your enemies. You don't get a choice. Anything outside of that doesn't work. So how do we do this? We must be willing to value them as God does. We must be willing to value them more than what they have done. And that's not easy. It's not. It's simple, but it's not easy. And sometimes it takes time. It is wisely said that forgiveness is often like grief. It takes time. But healing is possible. And you learn, like grief, you learn to live with it. Does it ever go away? No, but you learn to live with it better. And with that healing comes freedom. So what if there's an injustice, but no one's asking for forgiveness? What do we do with that? Well, that's where we just have to trust in the sovereignty of God. Someone once said this to me, and it stuck with me for years, that where there's an injustice committed, you'll see justice in this world or justice at the cross, where he bore it himself. That was the judgment of all the world when God himself bore all those injustices on himself, and he carried them away. And so we have to surrender it to his will. We are required to forgive even when you're not asked to. There's no loopholes in that. We are required to reconcile even when it's born in silence. The only way to avoid the destructive power of anger is to let God's grace diffuse it. And he will give it to you if you ask him. It takes his grace to have that humility, his grace to have that courage to seek it. It takes his grace to help us to love one another as he has loved us. There is no reason to hold on to anger, because like the story, the cask of Amontillado, it will destroy one or both of you. So seek his forgiveness, even to the greatest injustice, the greatest offense, and your deepest fear. It takes time, it takes work, but in the end, isn't it worth it to walk as Jesus did, to walk in his kingdom, countercurrent of this world? Amen?